Right now, we're watching the emergence of a new world order, or perhaps new world disorder is a better way to put it. Forget how you thought the world worked, because it works very differently now, and that's going to become more and more clear in February 2026. Buckle up, folks. The astrology suggests this is going to be one of the most dramatic and chaotic months of 2026. This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. As Saturn and Neptune get ready to form a conjunction in the very first degree of Aries and thus the entire zodiac, we're watching the end of the so-called rules-based international order, which has arguably been in place since the fall of the Soviet Union or perhaps the end of the Second World War, depending on how you see things. This shift was made abundantly clear at January's annual World Economic Forum meeting in the luxury Swiss resort of Davos, where Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney described it not as a transition, but a rupture. That feels very Aries to me. After all, rupture is something that sometimes accompanies birth, and this is happening fast, as is the way with Mars's hard-charging sign. Even more significantly, Carney said that the rules-based international order was really just a convenient and useful fiction for the West, and that military and economic power had been the true deciding factors in geopolitics all along, which most people knew, of course, but it was significant to hear a Western leader actually say that. Again, all this feels very Saturn-Neptune, which are both planets that have to do with illusions, or as Carney put it, fictions. The world operates under fictions and always has. And right now we're seeing one be put to rest. The last Saturn-Neptune conjunction came in Capricorn in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down and the unipolar US-led order began. Along with it came the lie that the world would be governed fairly according to established rules and institutions. Capricorn. Now a new fiction is taking hold, a new world disorder, given that order isn't really Aries' thing. We saw it with Donald Trump's actions in Venezuela, where he essentially said the US was getting rid of Maduro and would be taking control of the country's vast oil reserves. No apologies. And so right now we're watching a new fiction take hold. With the conjunction in Aries, perhaps we'll come to call it might makes right. At the same Davos meeting, US President Donald Trump introduced a new international organization called the Board of Peace, which will supposedly resolve conflicts around the world, including Gaza. Trump will be head of the board in perpetuity, of course. It's hard to know right now how substantial and even real these plans are, but it rather looks like Trump is setting up a new parallel international organization to the UN, which is reaching its Uranus return and its Pluto and Neptune oppositions right now. In other words, it's at a massive turning point. To be frank, so much happened last month, I can't fit it all in here. We also saw 2 killings of anti-ICE activists in the US, pointing towards the growing risk of an explosion in tensions between state and federal government there. And with several planets in Aquarius in the second half of the month, Aquarian themes were everywhere. On January the 23rd, the US Department of War explicitly confirmed on X-Twitter that it has directed energy weapons in its arsenal. People love to hate conspiracy theorists, but they've been talking about the existence of directed energy weapons for a long time now, and it seems they were right all along. Oh, and one last thing. Chinese President Xi Jinping has reportedly carried out a purge of his senior military leaders. This has come with a stellium of planets on China's ascendant, including Pluto at 3 degrees of Aquarius on the moon of the chart and with Mars close by. I said last month, watch China at the end of the month. I think this suggests that China is going to be preoccupied with internal issues for some time now, and perhaps it could even lead to unrest in the Chinese population. It seems unlikely that any invasion of Taiwan will come anytime soon either. And if you want to know more about why I think that, you should watch my recent live stream showing how to use zodiacal releasing in mundane astrology. In that stream, we look at Russian and Chinese history using this extremely powerful technique. Sign up as a member of World Astrology Report at my website for access to that stream and all the others, which are listed on the live streams page of worldastrologyreport.com. All right, I could go on about January even more because so much happened, but we need to get into our forecast for February, a month that looks likely to be one of the most chaotic and dramatic of 2026. Let's look ahead. If you're enjoying this so far, please give this channel some support by clicking the like button down there and even subscribing to the channel and activating notifications if you haven't done that already. All right, we begin February with a big pileup of planets in Aquarius, a 5-planet stellium of the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto. Having all that planetary energy concentrated in the forward-looking sign of the water pourer will give us a striking vision of the shape of the New World disorder that's currently presenting itself. And that energy will be highlighted right at the top of the month with a full moon at 13 degrees of Leo on the first day of February. Pluto in Aquarius is signifying profound transformations and empowerment, often through crisis in the domain of that sign. All these planets in Aquarius will be triggering Pluto and adding to the sense that the Aquarian part of your life is changing. But this full moon will trigger Aquarius's opposing sign of Leo, where the themes of visibility, authenticity, creativity, and the inner child predominate. And so expect this moon to shine a light on the question of how to maintain authenticity and what makes you, you amid this transformation. In terms of mundane astrology, I think this full moon could bring some damaging news for Israel, potentially related to its conduct in Gaza or its relations with the United States. Israel has a stellium of planets in Leo, the moon, Pluto, Saturn, and Mars. Those planets will be opposed by the month's Aquarius Stellium, and the full moon will be conjunct Israel's Pluto placement, shining a light on themes of control, manipulation, and power. And in probably related news, guess who I think is going to be back making headlines around this time? Yes, it's the dead sex criminal who just won't die, and may not even be dead anyway, Jeffrey Epstein. We have a chart for Epstein. His nodal axis is at 12 Leo and 12 Aquarius, and so it's taking a direct hit from this full moon, which may well shine fresh light on his life and operations. And I'll also be looking to Japan around this time. Japan is in the Leo zone of the geodetic map. The new moon that seeded the events of this full moon came 18 months earlier on August the 4th of 2024. That day, Japan's Nikkei plunged 12.4% in its biggest one-day fall since 1987. Japan's finances are in crisis right now. Its bond yields are soaring. And I think this full moon could bring more bad news. We'll talk a bit more about Japan later in this video because guess what? Its history also seems to resonate to the Saturn-Neptune cycle. All right, let's move on and tackle our next item of business, the shift of Saturn into Aries. On Valentine's Day, Saturn will make its second and final ingress into the martial sign of Aries this cycle. Saturn in Aries is going to test our ability to truly be ourselves, to move forward despite obstacles, to find courage, and to stick to our guns in the face of opposition. Traditionally, Saturn is thought to be ill at ease in Aries, the sign of its fall. Saturn wants to take things slowly and methodically and gradually build enduring structures, but that's not the Aries way. Aries is a move fast, break things sign. It favors taking quick and decisive action, but Saturn doesn't move like that. So during Saturn's transit through Aries, at times we'll feel Saturn's discomfort, with the sense that we're being pushed to act more quickly than we want or before we're ready. We may feel a bit like we're on our own at times. It's a bit of a me against the world transit. But this is also an opportunity to develop true strength and resilience. Bear in mind that Saturn in Aries has in a sense already begun. Saturn was in Aries in 2025, from May the 25th to September the 1st. So look to that period and the themes I've mentioned if you want clues for what's on the way. Of course, you can't understand Saturn's behavior right now without keeping in mind its ongoing conjunction with Neptune. Saturn has to do with what is concrete and stable and enduring, but Neptune washes this stability away, or at least severely compromises it. A common feeling I've seen in clients over the past year has been the sense of being lost in the fog in certain areas of life. Neptune orients us away from the so-called real world and towards the ideal and imaginal. That's making it harder to identify the practical way forward than it otherwise would be. So if you feel lost in the fog at the moment, I recommend just relaxing into that feeling and trusting that it's where you're meant to be now. Things should get clearer as Saturn moves away from Neptune in the middle of 2026 and much more substantially in 2027. But what will Saturn in Aries bring to the worldly mundane sphere? Well, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the themes of identity and sovereignty. Many people in Europe and the US are pushing back against the sidelining of their national identity in favor of a globalized multicultural ideal. I think that dynamic is going to get stronger as Saturn moves through Aries. Expect right-wing populism to take on more momentum. But Aries is also a war sign, bearing in mind the ongoing Second Cold War, including the high and growing tensions between Europe and Russia. I think we can expect to see new laws, obligations, and pressures related to conflict. Think conscription, think restrictions on speech, think digital ID. More broadly, the coming years are going to see a global fight for sovereignty. That might mean countries trying to break away from the influence of more powerful states or from international institutions, as Trump is already doing with the UN system. But we can also read this dynamic as playing out at an individual level. The technological systems under construction right now are becoming ever more invasive and authoritarian, particularly in Europe, including in my country, the UK. Saturn in Aries is going to take this to greater extremes and leading people to push back. I also think Saturn in Aries is going to put a lot of pressure on the United States, and particularly the tension between Trump's federal government and certain states. At the first ingress in May 2025, we saw these tensions explode in LA over immigration, and I think we're about to see a lot more of that. It seems that with both Saturn and Neptune in Aries, the US is going to face a battle over the question of immigration and borders and how to enforce them. All right, let's move on because we have a ton to talk about in February, which is not only Saturn-Neptune conjunction month, but also eclipse season. On February the 17th, we'll see an annular solar eclipse in the sign of Aquarius. This will be the first Aquarius eclipse since 2018, and it marks the first in a series of 6 eclipses in the Leo-Aquarius axis. And honestly, I think this eclipse is really going to put the cat amongst the pigeons, geopolitically speaking. In fact, it may already have done that, judging from what we saw in January. The difficulty with eclipses is that they come into effect weeks in advance, so sometimes it's hard to know if we've already seen most of its effects or if there's more to come. A lot of what we saw in January, when it started to look like the US and its old allies like Canada and Europe were no longer on the same side, was almost certainly related to this Aquarius eclipse. But to understand it better, let's break down the influences on it. It's appearing at 28 degrees of Aquarius and 49 minutes, and it's in a tight square with Uranus, which tells us that it's going to have a surprising or shocking or fast-moving feel to it. It will almost certainly bring events that you don't see coming. The closest aspecting traditional planet to the eclipse is Mars, which is 9 degrees away in Aquarius as well. That adds heat to the eclipse and potentially the theme of conflict. What's more, the traditional ruler of the eclipse is Saturn, which is in Mars' sign of Aries, conjunct Neptune, and in what I think most astrologers would agree is poor condition. In summary, this eclipse looks contentious, fiery, and chaotic, although most of this energy will be felt in the airy realm of words and ideas. Again, I'm thinking about what we saw in Davos here. It feels very much in line with this eclipse's symbolism, although there will probably be more of this. Now, this eclipse almost certainly implicates the United States because it's happening right on the moon of the Sibley chart. The moon is the signifier of the people in general and also of women in particular. Given the square from Uranus, we might expect events that bring a lot of excitement or anxiety or anger among the people of the country. And this could also be a signifier of rebellion or protests against the Trump administration. It could bring events that rile people up into action. And again, we might have already seen that with the recent shooting in Minneapolis. Now, surprise, surprise, I think this eclipse strongly implicates Donald Trump. It's happening right on his descendant with Uranus very close to his midheaven. It could have to do with his marriage, but more likely, I think that for Trump, this eclipse signals trouble around the theme of allies and adversaries. That could mean that his opponents in the US ramp up the pressure on him, or it might have to do with foreign policy, perhaps Russia. And it could be all of the above. Again, we might already have seen some of this because it seems his efforts to acquire Greenland have damaged his relations with the US's allies in Europe. And as we explore in the bonus section of this video, Greenland is Aquarian. I think there could also be big news related to Gaza and the fate of its population. news that could see Israel facing strong opposition from countries in its region. And this eclipse is one of many signals in early 2026 that point towards challenges for Russia. In the Russian 1991 flag raise charts, which I personally prefer, the descendant is at 25 Aquarius. So the eclipse is just 3 degrees away. It's highlighting trouble from enemies or allies for Russia too. And we have to consider that this same month sees a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, which reliably bring major developments for Russia. We'll explore this in more detail later in the video in the section on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Oh, and there's one more thing. I'll also be looking to India and Pakistan in February for signs of escalating tension between those countries that hasn't already manifested by the time you see this. This eclipse is from a family of eclipses that's repeatedly brought trouble for those countries. It was recently reported that security forces in New Delhi are on high alert for terrorist attacks by Pakistan-linked Islamist militants. Let's hope that this pattern doesn't hold this time. All right, let's move on and talk about what may be the most significant astrological event of 2026, the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in the very first degree of the zodiac. On February the 20th, we'll see the long-awaited exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries. We've already talked about how this conjunction seems to be bringing a new world disorder. It's brought barriers to trade in the form of Trump's tariffs. It's bringing an end to America's role as guarantor of global sea lanes, at least in some parts of the world. And I think it's also going to bring us revelations from the ancient past, most likely in Egypt, as I discussed in depth in this video. But here, I want to focus on how certain countries seem to resonate particularly strongly with this cycle. The first of them is, of course, Russia. By now, the resonances between this cycle and Russian history is very well known in astrological circles. In the 20th century, the 1917 Russian Revolution, the 1953 death of Stalin, and the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall all came at conjunctions of Saturn and Neptune. And so one of the Saturn-Neptune themes for Russia has been the dissolution of one power structure and its replacement with another. And for that reason, I've seen some astrologers speculate that 2026 could bring a change of regime in Moscow. Of course, it's a scenario we should keep in mind, especially because the Ukrainians have allegedly made at least 2 efforts on Vladimir Putin's life over the past year. I don't have chart details for Putin that I trust, so I don't have high convictions in how possible this is. Although I will say I am seeing a lot of factors that are pointing towards big challenges for Russia this year. But there's another pattern to Russian history in the Saturn-Neptune cycle that's less well known. And it's that these conjunctions bring moments when the Russian border is redefined. Where Russia's border with the West should actually be has never really been settled. After all, that's really what the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was about. In 1952, at the same conjunction that took Stalin's life, East Germany closed its previously open border with West Germany. But you can go way back in history and see similar patterns. A good example is the founding of St. Petersburg that gave Russia access to the Baltic Sea in 1703, following a Russian victory over Sweden. So I think it's a strong possibility that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is going to bring an end, or at least a freezing of the Ukraine conflict and the fixing of Russia's western border. Having said that, I'd be surprised if that came in February. I think that conflict is probably going to get worse before it gets better, especially in the first third of 2026. Another country with strong Saturn-Neptune resonance is Iran, which is a subject I covered in depth in this recent video. I don't want to review all of that material again here, but what I will say is that these conjunctions have historically brought changes of regime in Iran, and the Islamist regime in Iran right now will come under a lot more pressure from its adversaries this year. And I have one more country that seems to experience similar patterns to Russia and Iran with Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and that's Japan. The Allied occupation of Japan ended, and the modern Japanese state was established in 1952 at one of these conjunctions. And in 1989, at the last one, Japan's Emperor Hirohito, who had ruled since 1926, died and handed over the throne to his son, Emperor Akihito. At the end of that year, Japan's Nikkei stock index reached its all-time peak, marking the zenith of Japan's economic dominance before the collapse of its bubble in 1990. To 91. As we've already seen, Japan is experiencing a financial crisis right now, and the country's Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, has just called a snap election for February the 8th. So watch Japan in February and indeed in 2026. Now, if you want to know more about the astrology of what's happening in Iran right now, I suggest you watch this video, which will get you full up to speed. In the members version of this video, available for channel members here on YouTube or on my website, we look at the astrology linking Greenland and a bizarre event in 1996, often referred to as Brazil's Roswell. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you again very soon.